Hello, and welcome back to a new episode of the Elevate Your Running podcast. I'm here with Coach Amber. Hey, Coach Amber, how's it going?
Hey Sarah, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. We spent quite a bit of time before this recording catching up, so it's been fun to do that, and it's fun to have you back on the podcast.
Yeah, it's fun to be back and catch up, see what's going on.
That's right. That's right. Well, we're in a new year, which means potentially if you're listening to this, you are the same runner that you were last year, but you might be looking to develop some skills. You might be looking to get stronger. You might be looking to get faster. In today's episode, Coach Amber and I want to talk about pace changes and pace gears and how to develop those gears of speed for you to become a more well-rounded athlete or well-rounded runner. I know a lot of times I hear from the running community like, but I'm a marathoner and I only train for marathons. And that's absolutely great. At the end of the day, running should absolutely fill your cup in the best way possible. And it's really cool and it's really neat if you have different gears of speed that you can use throughout the course of not just your training, but your race seasons, your races, and see what you can really do in all different types of distances.
Yeah, no matter what type of distance you're training for, you need multiple gears. You can't just have the one gear, which a lot of people, just lace up their shoes and run out the door, and they kind of have the same pace when they're a newer runner. And I think that's where a lot of folks fall a little bit short in reaching their speed potentials. So no matter the distance, you need many different gears.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could be a runner in that stage right now of, yeah, I lace up my shoes, I get out the door, I run the exact same pace every single day. Chances are, I'm going to put this in like in parentheses, like chances are the run is too fast, right? It's like a really hard run. I used to be that runner,
Too, yeah.
100%, 100%. Yeah. And there's only one pace that you're running. And that's fine for that season of running, but there are really cool things that you can do as a runner to be able to have different speeds and to feel what, mile pace, 5K, 10K, half marathon, marathon pace feels like, and then to also run and run those speeds.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. What do you see the most, Amber, out of athletes that you've coached in terms of like the speed? Do you feel like they don't necessarily, let's say you're working with a lot of marathoners, which I know you do. You also work with a lot of ultra marathoners, but are you finding that they don't have like that top end speed as much as maybe they don't have more of that like longer tempo kind of endurance? Or what are you kind of seeing out there?
Yeah, I think most runners who have been running for quite some time are okay. Some are really, really great actually at short speed, like 100 meters, 200 meters, like they can bring it for a short amount of time. But then when you get into like the mile pace or you get into even a 5K, it's really hard to figure out the gear that you need in order to go at a really fast pace for quite a long time. If you're going for a mile up to 5K, that's quite a lot of time at that really fast speed, and that's something that a lot of marathoners and ultra marathoners don't develop as much.
Yeah, absolutely. Because they are working on more of that slower running, that aerobic foundation. They don't necessarily need to have speed workouts in their training plan. They can really do without it. And a story that I shared with Amber before we jumped on the recording was when I first got into training for my first marathon, I was coming off of doing a lot of high intensity interval training. So, Orange Theory, running at the time, I think I was running between 9 and 9.3 on the tread on like those 1 minute all out efforts, and you just go. And when I came to Nell to work with her for my first marathon, it's like, oh, I actually had that top end speed, and we needed to develop that aerobic foundation as well as the distance, the time on feet, and then how we can pull together, running what I wanted to run in my first marathon, which was a Boston qualifying time. So she had a lot to work with in terms of that top end speed. But then I shared with Amber, I, really, I took a pause from coaching for a few months. We went into the pandemic. I started working with a different coach, and that wasn't really his focus, maintaining that kind of like speed in a runner. So when I went back to now, it was like one of the first things she said when she saw me in person was like the difference of like the runner that she had 2 years ago and like what we get to work on now, which was totally different. She's like, you could run all day if you wanted to, but your speed is lacking and we really have to focus on this. So there is a way to balance it when you are marathon training. And there's definitely, a lot of benefit, I think, to having those dedicated seasons of speed to be able to develop those gears. But, before we kind of dive into that, Amber, do you want to share more about like the different types of running speeds and kind of like what they are, just as a general kind of like vocabulary?
Sure. Also, I just wanted to add on that I think, it's easier for people to be like, here's my fast speed and then here's my slow speed.
Yeah.
If you're like run easy, it's like most people know what that means, you know? It's like
Yeah.
I'm gonna run really easy so I can have a conversation with the person I'm running with or whatever. Like they can feel that out. And then running fast, it's like I'm gonna run as fast as I can run around this track one time, do a 400 all out. They know what that feels like and they know what the other feels like, but all the things in between can get a little nuanced and you really have to practice and really be aware and focus on those different gears because a lot of times too you're trying to do too many things at once, like you're listening to a podcast, you're listening to music, you're talking to people, you're doing all these things while trying to develop these different gears. So sometimes just like cutting out all of the distractions and really focusing and being like, okay, I'm really focusing on 10K effort during this workout. That's my main goal, is to feel out what does 10K effort feel like. And that can change as you get faster and stronger and work hard and all of that good stuff. But really being aware of and watching how that feels, watching the signals that your body's giving you of what that feels like in your legs and what that feels like in your heart and what that feels like in your breathing. Just all of really paying attention and being aware of the cues your body's giving you at different speeds, I think is really important to know.
Yeah, and I like to think of it as kind of like I think of it as like a hand. Like you have five fingers on a hand, you kind of have five different gears that you can go to in running, and you can have that easy effort, you can have that long run effort, you can have the marathon effort, you can have that threshold or tempo effort, and then you have like the K or the mile. So maybe there's six gears on this hand. I think I threw in marathon pace, which isn't actually a gear. It's just like it is what it is. But yeah, if you have easy, long run, tempo threshold, okay, 1 mile, that's a really good gauge of having a good development of speed gears. You have five different gears, and now you can kind of take a look at your running and say, well, what do I have out of those five? Do I have a difference between my easy effort and my long run, which are different paces? Those are different. Those can be very different gears. Do you have that tempo or that threshold that's going to be right around that 10K half marathon pace and speed? Then, of course, we have the lovely K, which is like a very hard speed to master, especially at the distance of 3.1 miles. And then you have like that mile gear. And of course, if you're a track athlete, you could even go many more gears under that. And yeah, yeah. And that's, I think, what's so exciting. But it's also, I think a lot of runners get into training and they kind of get into this groove of just having maybe a few of those gears, or like you mentioned earlier, Amber, one gear.
Yeah, and I like how you differentiated between easy run and like marathon pace because it's very different. I mean,
Yeah.
depending on too like what your goal is for your race and like what your time goal is, it can be really different or it can be slightly different, but it's usually different. Your easy gear is literally conversational pace. You're talking, you can have full on conversation with a buddy. And marathon pace, you're going to be huffing and puffing. Like, it's not an easy road running a full marathon where you're just chatting away. You're pushing, you're working really hard. It's just a very different gear than if you're working really hard at a 5K. So, yeah, knowing all of those different gears and understanding what your goal is for each run that you do is really important, because I think sometimes people also will go out and say they're going to run some junk miles, in quotes.
Yeah.
And I don't think there should be junk miles. I think every mile should be for something. There should be a goal for going out the door. If you're doing an easy run, then that's great. You're doing an easy run to build more miles on your legs, to work on endurance, to maybe get your weekly or monthly mileage up so that you can be a stronger runner. But those miles are going to something, they're not junk. They're for a specific reason and purpose. And knowing what that purpose is and knowing that it's an easy run and you need to take it very easy so that you have steam for, you've got some energy in your legs for your upcoming workout is super important. So every run is for something. There's a reason for it and a purpose that's important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And like those easy recovery runs are so beneficial. They not only help you recover from the harder efforts, if you are doing those harder efforts, which would be another gear on your gear hand, but also like it does develop your aerobic foundation. You get to build your mileage, and we all know that more mileage is better. No, not every runner can run more mileage, and that's okay, but there are ways to kind of supplement more mileage with some cross training, or if you're coming off of a high mileage season, sometimes it's really fun as a coach. Like I'll bring that athlete back down, we'll run less mileage, increase the intensity, and they produce a breakthrough race. It can be, can be really fun in that way. And it's just so different how every athlete is so different. And there's so many different nuances within all of it.
Yeah, and but I would say, like you said, the most common gears that we use as coaches are that easy pace gear, the marathon gear, the half marathon threshold gears, which can be different depending
Yeah.
on your paces, or it could be closer to the same depending on your paces. 10K, 5K, 2 mile I use for some of the intervals that I give out to my athletes, and mile, and sometimes even a little bit faster than mile if it's really short intervals.
Yeah, and I think where that speed comes into play is the strides. Like if you have strides programmed into your runs, maybe they're in a run, like in the middle of a run, or they could be after a run and you have standing recovery. Your stride is an acceleration of speed for the first half of that stride, and then you kind of decelerate a bit in the second half, and your top end speed should be pretty darn fast. Like I can get mine down to well under my mile race pace, right? Like well under. It's fast, it's speedy, it's sharp. Your legs are moving, you have a high cadence, and it's developing a really strong runner in the process. You're not only working on your running form, but you are working on becoming a faster runner in these short bursts of strides. So if you have strides on your in your training plan, whether they're written by me, written by Coach Amber, or maybe another coach, like please do them. They are so important to develop that very top end speed gear. And over the course of weeks, when you add up all those strides, they turn into miles of work at that pace. And I know 20 seconds or 5 by 20 seconds, 4 by 20 seconds is usually what I prescribe. Isn't a lot of time, but over the course of a training cycle or over the course of a year, it's definitely going to be impactful and you are going to get stronger and faster for it. If you listen to episode to go back in the archives. Not really, just last year. But I want to say it's episode 56. It's with Caleb McCoy. And he was talking about his Indianapolis prep. And he had switched coaches. He wanted to get a new training stimulus. And he talked about how after most of his runs, now this is for an advanced runner, he would run 8 to 10 by 20-second strides after his run, and they would be fast and they would be sharp, and he'd be practicing his cadence on tired legs, and he was able to improve his stride pace over the course of his Indianapolis build, which I think was 13 weeks. And that's pretty incredible. And that episode is actually episode 150.
I remember that. I remember you talking with him about that. And it adds up over time for sure. And he was doing those all the time and more than we usually prescribe too. So he was getting a lot of time on feet with those strides.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to know like having the variety of speeds in a training plan. So you have the strides, you have maybe that tempo effort, you have the marathon tempo, you have the long run, the easy effort. That's all designed to not only improve your endurance as a runner, because specifically if you are training for a half or a marathon or an ultra, you need that endurance. You need that aerobic foundation in order to race this distance, but it also builds speed, obviously, but it prevents injury because there is a lot of variety within the training and you're not doing just the same thing over and over and over again. And I know to be true that if you have a lot of speed in your plan, or maybe it's that threshold, because that can be kind of an uncomfortable pace for some people. I call it a very like grindy pace. Like my Indianapolis training had so much like threshold training in it. I had a lot of 6:30 paces for a long time that was just running and it just felt very like grindy. You're going to develop a stronger mental toughness. And that was something I said to my coach during our race strategy call. I was like, I've worked so many grindy miles in this cycle that I know when the race starts to become like that, I can pull from these workouts and know I'm going to be able to get through it and kind of like put myself there. I like to put myself back in training when I'm racing to like relax myself to be like, this is just like your training run on whatever day. So, those are all really important aspects to why developing speed is important. I think always staying healthy and preventing injuries is also key because, as we know, 80 to 90% of runners get injured every single year. And that is a very high number of runners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and that kind of, I was thinking about too. We've been talking a lot about gears and the like, where those fall. But one thing I wanted to say as well is effort, right? Because
Yeah.
sometimes we as coaches we prescribe paces and we usually give effort cues, but as an athlete, you have to know like what am I going for here? This is, this tempo is supposed to be at threshold pace or whatever. What does my threshold effort feel like, and try to replicate that, because on any given day it could be a little bit different. You're not going to always be hitting the exact paces that you're prescribed, or always be like, okay, my threshold pace is X, Y, and Z. You might have to, if you're having a day where you're really tired or starting to feel a little bit sick, or just, like you haven't been eating as clean or whatever. There could be a plethora of things where you have to go a little bit slower, but you're still hitting that same effort. And I always tell my athletes that that's okay. Like, as long as you are hitting that effort, your body knows effort. And so, later when you've eaten well and slept well and all the things, your paces will align. But sometimes you have to revert to effort if you're having a tough day. So, something to just think about.
Absolutely. And I think like effort is always, I call it queen. Like it's always going to be queen. Like it is king too, right? But I coach a lot of women. So it's queen. And it is at the end of the day always going to be enough. Always. Like I have been in a 5K training build and I've had to resort on effort on some cold days where I've had to also like alter my workouts for holidays and for New Year's and like shift it. So everything was kind of condensed into like 4 days instead of 7 days. And it was a lot, like 2 workouts, a long run, and a rest day all in 4 days, 2 weeks over. And it just became a lot. I'm like, you know what? I have to throw these paces out the window. I have to run on effort. And I know if I can feel good for the race, I will be okay. Like I'll be able to shine and do what I want to do. And I think it takes a lot of practice to know the effort. It takes a lot of practice to understand what that feeling should be like. So, if you're a newer runner, it's okay if you don't know that. A lot of my newer runners in this could be in their long run or it's designed as a workout. And maybe Amber, we've talked about this workout. It's like, it could be like a 4, 3, 2, 1 minute, and maybe it's 2 times over. And you're just working different gears to feel the difference of like, I just want you to start at like let's say marathon pace for the 4 minutes, and then 3 minutes at half marathon, or what tempo would be like, 2 minutes at 10K effort, 1 minute at 5K effort, and for them to feel that. And then also I ask them to like look back on their splits to see those paces and not to assign an effort with the pace, but for them to see the progression of how much faster they got.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll do that like once a month until an athlete really understands like what that is, how it feels. Cause that's probably one of the number one questions I get as a coach is, well, what is half marathon effort? What should that feel like? Or, so you can assign it to like a scale. An RPE scale is usually what I assign it to. And at the end of the day, it's never going to be perfect. But if you know that you're focused in on the pace, you're focused in on what you believe to be that effort for the day, it will reign true and come true for what you're trying to create when you feel good and you are targeting a pace.
Yeah, totally. One thing too that's fun to do every once in a while is a lot of coaches assign speed work where it's like 400s or 800s or mile repeats or whatever, but in between your recovery is like go as slow as you need to get your breathing back under control and ready to go for your
Yeah.
next rep. Every once in a while, I give my athletes something that blows their mind, which is not an easy recovery. Like when you say, okay, I want you to do 1 minute at 5K effort, 1 minute at marathon effort, 2 minutes at 5K effort, 2 minutes at like where you're playing around with the recovery not being as easy as you can go, but actually being at a specific effort gear is kind of blows their mind because they're like my body's so used to just like letting like just going as slow as possible in those recoveries that it like they don't know what to do. But that's a really good way to throw those in every once in a while to really have to focus on gears and feeling what those feel like so that it's not just fast, slow, fast, slow. It's like this particular effort. And you have to really be aware to be able to fall into that without just trying to go slow and recover.
Yeah, absolutely. I love those alternations of like some sort of pace discrepancy. So I like to give a lot of like marathon, half marathon when in a marathon training cycle. And,
Mm-hmm.
there's a specific goal around that. It's not usually pace gears or to feel that difference. Maybe it is sort of to feel the difference, but ultimately I want the athlete to come back to me and say like, I felt really strong and smooth running marathon pace because they were making those half marathon pace surges, right? And then they were pulling back. And it's something that once they can practice in training, we talk about that on their race strategy call of how they can implement that, when they implement it, when it makes sense. Because at some point, marathon pace is just going to turn into like a grind, right? And sometimes surging is actually like the best thing you can do to whether you find a new gear and hold, or you pull back at some point and continue to run your goal marathon pace. So there's a lot of like cool things that you can do to not only develop the speed gears in training with track workouts and with workouts like Amber just mentioned, but also like how to kind of design it to set the athlete up for success in their races too.
Yep, exactly.
So let's get into like the training side of things. I know we just kind of talked about some workouts, but how do you determine like the appropriate speed then for each type of run? Do you only prescribe effort, Amber, or do you like to give heart rate? Or I love pace ranges. I'm a big believer in the range. And then some athletes get ranges with effort or an RPE scale to kind of fall back on if they need to. But kind of how do you determine kind of that appropriate speed?
Yeah, I don't do heart rate.
Yeah.
I just feel like there's so many variations with your heart rate, and I feel like that kind of for me when I watched my heart rate for a while to try to track the data, and it was all over the place, and it kind of just was too much for me when
Yeah.
it was taking away from really honing in on effort because I was like, oh, I'm out of this heart rate range. Oh, now I'm too fat. Now I'm like it was like too much. Um,
Yeah.
so I don't do heart rate, but I do pace ranges, and then I do effort cues. And it kind of depends on the workout. Like if it's, 400s and, they're doing them at whatever 5K effort, they know what that feels like, and then I give them a pace range. So I don't, it's not like there's like intensive details about the effort. It would just be like you're doing these, 12 400s at 5K effort, and then here's your pace range. But some, when it comes to specific workouts, sometimes there's more effort cues, because if it's a more complicated workout or switching between a lot of different gears, I want them to really be able to cue in on what they're going for, what the goal is. One thing that I learned, and I should say I learned it pretty early on, but I didn't. Sometimes it takes me a long time to learn things. But when I first started running, I would get so hung up on paces, so hung up
Yeah.
that
I
I
think
would,
a lot of runners do.
yeah, and I would
Yeah.
feel like a failure if I didn't hit the exact pace that I needed to hit. And that made me feel a lot of anxiety, and also like a lot of times that I was either, like, wow, look how cool I am, I did the workout so much faster than my coach prescribed, or I was like, I suck and I should never run again because I was 5 seconds off. Like, both completely ridiculous sides of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But eventually I learned that effort was, like you said, was queen. It would trump the paces. And so that's where I think it's just good to know those that you coach and know what it is that they need to hear. I have one runner who gets in her head a lot. And so if I
Yeah.
know that she's getting in her head, I do have the pace ranges on there, but I just really focus in my comments on really hone in on effort. This is what I want you going for. Don't worry about what your watch says. Hone in on effort. And it helps her a lot to do that. So kind of just depends on the athlete and what they need to hear.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think there's nothing wrong with running on effort. And it doesn't mean that you can't hit pace. It just provides, I think, more of an area for you to lean in, to feel comfortable, to feel confident. And ultimately, in my experience, the best race outcomes come from runners who run on effort and not the runners who are tied to their watch looking at the pace.
Well, and like you talked about before, strides, you can't run strides on your watch. Like, it's over by the time you checked your watch.
Totally. Sometimes I peek down, it's like 15 seconds, okay, I have 5 more to go, but, like, I'm, like, slowing down at that point, right?
Yeah, yeah. So there's times, and the other thing though, like, we're not throwing shade on the paces, because you need to know what that pace, like, especially if you're starting out, like, what pace should you even be around, right? And we as coaches, that's kind of our job, to gather all of the data from, if you've done some time trials or from previous races that you've done recently, we can gather all that data and see
Yeah.
where you should be. And then if you're continually performing higher than that and everything's feeling easier, then we move that, and we make things faster. But really compiling all the data, looking at it, telling you what range you should be in, you using that as like, okay, this is what I'm shooting for. This is what that effort should feel like, understanding that effort. And then when you're having days where you have to revert to effort because the pace isn't coming, that's okay. You know what that effort feels like. So it all kind of goes hand in hand.
Yeah, and this is kind of a side note, but, like, the cold is gonna make running workouts harder. So, like, I had a workout last month where we had planned to meet in South Boulder, me and my team, and the first person got there, she sent a picture to all of us. It had snowed in, like, half of town. The other half didn't have snow. It was, like, wild. And so we're like, "Okay, where should we go now?" We ended up going to this place that I wasn't super excited about because we were running some tempo efforts. I had some, like, 1K bookends in front and behind this tempo effort. The last K was, like, really fast on the road, or it was supposed to be on the track. And then I had like 200s that were also supposed to be on the track. And one of my teammates, Tony, he's like, "Well, I'll run with you. I think it'll be really great." And he's like, "And we'll just run on effort." So, like, yeah, this isn't like a perfect situation. Like, we're running this, like, I think we ended up running like a 3 mile loop, and I had a 4 mile tempo. So we were running this loop like a little over one time. And it was like slight uphill to slight downhill to big uphill. And that was kind of the square that we were running. And when you're running at altitude uphill, it can absolutely destroy you. Like, it can absolutely take you down, and it's not usually the first loop, it is always the second loop, and, like, it was true for all of us that day. All of us had a really hard time with it, but I went back every time we were, like, looked down at my watch. I mean, I did a pretty good job staying with where I needed to be, but it's like, it wasn't like you said, Amber, you want to run on the faster side of things. Like, it wasn't on the faster side of my tempo range. I kept telling myself, like, you're running on effort, you're running uphill, this is going to be harder, this will translate. So I think it's also really important to know, like, where you're running, what you're doing, knowing if you're running uphill too, the effort's going to be the same, but the pace is going to be quite a bit slower because of that. Definitely. What do you?
Other things that can change too are like I've got athletes that train for some of these revel races, right?
Yeah.
So you're doing a
Yeah.
downhill race, your effort is going to be very different than what your pace marks might say on the apps that we use. So that's why having those conversations with your coach of like, what should this pace be on a downhill course is going to be very different than a flatter hilly course. And then
Yeah.
also summer heat, same thing. Like you're going to be
Yeah.
needing to adjust paces when you're running in the heat.
Yeah. When you have athletes run Revel, do you work with them mostly on effort, or do you adjust their paces for the significant downhill? So Revel usually has for the full marathon about 2,500 feet of net loss. So you're like bombing down this hill. Everyone thinks these races are so fast, and they're only fast if your legs and your body can hold up. If your body can't hold up, it's not going to be a good day because
Yeah.
it's just a lot of stress.
Yeah, some of them are up to 5,000 net loss in a marathon,
Wow.
which is like a lot.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I feel like you need to live in a location where you can replicate something like that. Even, I mean, if you live somewhere where
A
it's
bit.
flat, like I have one lady right now who's wanting to do a revel, and she lives where it's like pancake flat, but she has a treadmill that has a decline. So we work on that, but you have to prepare for the race you want to run. So that's where what we do is, you get these added into your training program of downhill actual training runs, and then typically, depending on the athlete, but typically you can run 20 to 25 seconds per mile faster
Mhm.
if it's that much, like
Yeah.
5,000 feet net on a marathon, if you're trained properly. If you're not trained properly and you go out at that pace halfway through, your legs are gonna like buckle.
Yeah.
Your
Yeah, it's
quads
not gonna be a great
are
day.
gonna be really hurting. So yeah, you just have to train for it. But I do actually adjust their paces based on the race that they're going to be running. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a tricky race, and it's a race I as a coach, I don't love. Like, anytime an athlete comes to me and they're like, "I signed up for a Revel." And I love the company. They run really well-run races. I think the half you can kind of sneak away like, okay. I think the marathon itself is like there's just so much damage that comes into play running a marathon, running a flat marathon, like the recovery time and the stress and the inflammation in your body is wild, and it takes a really long time to come back from that. And then when you add in 5,000 feet of downhill, net downhill, because it's not all downhill, there are hills, it's
Usually
net
at the end
downhill.
too. Usually they're at the end when your legs.
Yeah, you're just done. It is a lot, and it can be a lot, and it is a balancing act of making sure there isn't too much downhill training in your plan, because that can cause a lot of injuries, and making sure that the runner is just as strong as possible.
Mhm.
But what do you find are some common mistakes that runners make when training at different speeds?
That they make while training at different speed. I just think like a lot of times on the shorter intervals, it's like all out.
Yeah.
Instead
Yeah.
of 90 to 95% effort,
Yeah.
it's like all out balls to the walls. And then they're like, what did I just do? Like, I only could complete 4 out of the 8 or whatever.
Yeah.
So, really figuring out what it means to go all out and what it means to save just a little bit so that you can keep going and completing your. And then I also think that what's a little bit tricky as a coach sometimes, but when you know your athletes, you can figure it out, is just if you, like, we train where you're at right now with knowing in mind where you want to be at the end of the training cycle and what your goal is for the race. And so we have to balance out paces based on where you're at right now because we can't give you harder than what your body's capable of doing, but knowing that in 12, 14, 16 weeks, you want to be over here. We have to continually like move the needle forward. So I think that's what sometimes people make mistakes in is if they don't
Yeah.
have a coach or they're following like a prefab plan or something like that, knowing what all of those paces are based on where they're at now and seeing the big picture of how to get them to where they want to be.
Absolutely. And I think as someone who is new to what effort feels like, new to track workouts, new to speed workouts, I think it's really easy to go too hard. And you kind of have to learn, I think, in some ways the hard way, whether you burn out and you're like, I could only do 4 reps today instead of 8, because you will burn out and there'll be like a point where you won't be able to do more reps for sure. Or like I had a runner this summer, we talked about effort. It was in the Wednesday night group training, and I love her so much. Talked about effort, what it should feel like. Let's start out slow. I'm a big believer in progression workouts, even on tracks. Like, I won't prescribe like 10 by 5K or 10 by 400 at 5K pace. It'll be like, let's warm up the first few reps and then we'll get into 5K pace. And then if you're feeling good, we might dip under 5K pace for like the last one or two. And this runner went out so hard. She was so nervous. She's like, I can't run, I'm going to make this up. I can't run like 7:30 pace. I just can't do it. And she ended up running like 6-minute mile pace on the track. And I was like, look, you did it. But then she was like, so like fatigued and her body was super stressed. And like, it was just like this polar opposite or this extreme of running a lot of easy, some marathon tempo, thinking she can't run anything faster than marathon tempo, and then going into a 400 and just absolutely like blazing it, which was like really fun as a coach to see, but also very scary because like you kind of know what's coming on the other side of that when that starts to happen. And there's no like speed control and there's no like focus. I'm a big believer in checking your pace on the track as you're running to check yourself. But that all comes with time. Like you said, Amber, it's like a progression of this is where we are now. We have 14 weeks to build. We don't need to jump to week 14 today. We just take it slow, baby steps, because the consistent small steps are going to equal the success that you want.
Yeah, and that can happen with group runs a lot. I think that,
Yeah.
I mean, that person was like me on my very first 400 workout ever
Yeah.
in my life. I remember
Yeah.
I showed up to a run club and the coach was a friend of mine and he was like, okay, this is what we're doing. It was 10 400s, everyone seemed to know what they were doing. It was my first time. And I was like, okay. But of course, like I was nervous, like she probably was. And I
Yeah.
was thinking, I'm going to be so slow and it's going to be embarrassing and all of that good stuff. And so I did the same thing. I went out blazing fast and like almost beat everybody in the pack. And then I was dying
Yeah.
and I think I lasted 5 by sheer willpower, and then I was done. Like I couldn't have jogged another one. My legs were so shot because I
Yeah.
wasn't trained. So that's, it's important to really, again, know what your goal is for the workout and to know what that pace would somewhat look like. At least have a range so that you can stay within that and not die because we always want you to finish strong.
Absolutely. There should always be like 1 or 2 reps left in the tank when you finish a speed workout. Like, you finish 10 by 400. This is what I say to my Wednesday night group. I'm like, what if I were to like just pop up in this like workout that I'm not at? Or what if I just like pop over your shoulder and I'm like, hey, tap you on the shoulder. You have 2 more. Like, could you do that? That's kind of the goal. Like if a coach were to just come up and say to you at the end of your workout, oh, you actually have 2 more reps, you want to be able to say like, yes, I can do it. Is it going to be hard? Yes. Is it going to suck? Probably. But like I have enough gas in the tank to be able to do this versus like I went so hard in my last 1, 2, 3 reps. I actually can't do another rep. That's the danger zone. That's when a lot of injury can come into play or burnout from the athlete. But I think it's really important too to like what you said of like, you're showing up to a group run and you're thinking about what everyone else is thinking about you. So this is what I know to be true about group workouts because I participate in them and I also coach them. so I get to see both sides, is that the only person that's looking at you is your coach. And
Mm-hmm.
your coach doesn't, at least my coaching style, I don't necessarily care if the athlete's slow or whatever. Like, I just want to support them and give them a good workout and have them kind of like have a light bulb kind of go off on some point for that workout. But everyone else on the team is so concerned about what they're doing, they are not looking at anyone else. And it's really hard to know what pace other people are running on a track, or let's say you're running around a lake or something. No idea. You have no idea because everyone's just out there doing their thing, especially if people are like, I section up my team in like 3 groups, and each of those 3 groups start at a different time. So like you have no idea what other people are doing, but I can definitely see how that can get in the head of an athlete because it's really easy to do that. And I know I was like that in my own training group, starting with Nell. It was very intimidating just to like have her there, but then see all these girls that are just so much faster than me and like trying to keep up and like not embarrass myself. My first workout was 10 by 400. It's a good one.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I did have that run coach though. He later, after I'd been with the club for a while, he would do what you said to your athletes. He would pop up. You would be out like on you would do like Coal Creek Trail, and
Yeah.
you'd be running all in different groups all along this trail, all spread out, doing different like, 10-minute tempos or whatever, where everyone's spread out. And he was so fast, this guy, that he would like go group to group and be like, I know I told you 3 by 10 minutes, but you're gonna really do 4. And he would tell us that like while we were running our third one or
Oh my God.
something. He would pop up and just like, oh, by the way. And we were all like cussing him. Yeah, we were
Yeah.
not happy, but we all could do it.
Yeah.
Your body can do it if you're staying within your prescribed range. It's
Yeah.
hard, but you can do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I've had it happen to me as an athlete. Like Nell's thrown on like an extra K at the end of my workout. And I'm like, great. Like, yeah, I can do it. It's just hard.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes that happens and it's always for the good of the athlete. It's not to like punish or to make you feel like you did something bad. It's always because like the coach can see that you can do something and you can do a little bit more, and that's a good place to be. But where do you see like how can runners incorporate speed work into their weekly training schedule? Like we kind of talked about that a little bit in terms of like the frequency, the volume, and the progression. But like, do you kind of see athletes kind of starting out small, kind of with like that? Let's say they're doing some hill strides or some flat strides at like 20 seconds, 4 by 20, 5 by 20. And then over the time of your training cycle or over the course of a year or years of training, you just kind of evolve that, right? You progress into it.
Yeah, even brand new runners, like I've had runners who are like couch to 5K, and even that, I like them to develop consistency and routine. So if they're like, I can run and I can commit to running 4 times a week or 3 times a week or whatever it is, I still like to give them like a consistent speed workout in there, even if it
Yeah.
starts at 20 seconds, times 4 or
Yeah.
whatever it is, but giving them at least one day, and usually 2 days, one where it's more shorter speed and one where it's more tempo or half marathon effort, depending on what they're training for, but still keeping those 1 or 2 days so that they can really get a sense for that consistent week of training, but catering it to exactly where they're at, so not making it too hard, I think really helps, because then you can continually build and they can see their progression. That's one thing that I was thinking about as we were preparing for this podcast, is just, it's really important for us as coaches to keep track of the data that our runners are running,
Yeah.
so that we can show them, like I replicate my workouts every so often, depending on what they're aiming for, and what their goal is. But a lot of times in my notes I'll say, you did this workout 2 months ago and these were your paces. Your workout today is to go a little bit faster. I'm moving the needle to here, like they have it in
Yeah.
their head and they know, and then it makes them feel so happy when they can see that they are at that, like that their effort now is the same as their effort was then, but their paces are faster. And it makes them feel like they're really progressing, which is awesome.
Yeah, that's always a good feeling when you have those like standard workouts. They're not standard, they're so good to have, but they are the workouts that continuously pop up in your training. And there's such good like measurements of like where you are then and where you are now. And I'll typically say something after the fact. Like if a runner is starting to run faster in their reps, like I'll put it in their comments as I'm reviewing their workout of like, do you remember when you ran this at this time? Or I have a girl right now. Well, at the time this airs, she ran Houston, and one of her big accomplishments in this build, and she runs the Houston Marathon every year, is her moderate pace right now, which is like that pace between easy and marathon pace. So it's kind of that in between zone was her marathon pace last year. And now that's like her moderate pace. And then she's running faster for marathon pace. And it's so fun to kind of see that, acknowledge it, highlight it. It's such a cool piece to it.
Yeah, and so if you don't have a coach, then just make sure you're journaling, like you're writing down your workouts and your paces so that you can gauge, what you need to do the next time and you can kind of see your progression. Otherwise, I think people get frustrated with running. I'm not getting anywhere, and they just kind of throw in the towel because they're not tracking it and they can't see that they're actually progressing with all of their hard.
Yeah. So what do you recommend then for runners who are struggling to incorporate speed work into their training? So maybe they are the runner that's throwing their hands up in the air, and they're saying, I'm not getting any faster. This isn't working. What's kind of your recommendation for them?
Do it anyway. Start.
That's a good coach right there. Do it because I said so. Do it
Anyway,
anyway.
start small, because if it's
Yeah.
something that's overwhelming, then do something that's manageable and then build upon that. Start small, like even if it is like strides, even if it is 30-second pickups, 1 minute pickups, whatever it is that you feel like you can do it and build upon that. Don't give up. Don't just say you're not going to do speed work and you're just going to run all your runs at one speed. If your goal is to get faster and to become a better runner, then just do it, embrace the suck, write it down, and do it again and do it again and do it again and start to move that needle, and you'll see that everything becomes a little bit easier. That's one thing that I think is funny too, is people that don't run, when they know that you're a runner, they say things like, "Oh, like what are you running from?" Like you have this like dark side of you that you just need to like run from or something,
Yeah.
because they don't get it because they haven't done it, and they think, maybe they've gone out on one run and they can remember how awful it was and how painful it was. But that's the thing, is the more you do it, the easier it gets with regards to effort. You just continually push the pace to make it hard for yourself because you're trying to improve as a runner. But the more that you train your body, the more that it becomes acclimated to running, and it's actually enjoyable and fun. That's why we all do it, is because of all the benefits that we get out of it. But you can't stop, you can't give up, and you can't just avoid things you don't like if you want to become better.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. Absolutely. And I think it's just really important to know that just like training is not linear, right? Like building speed is also not linear. So you might have, let's say you have this standard workout that you're running every month, let's say. It's on the first Wednesday of the month. And the first 2 months, you're getting faster. The third month, you're getting even faster. And then the fourth month, you notice you're not as fast. That's totally normal. I've had quite a few track workouts since Indy that have been not where I want them to be. And that's okay because the effort's there and it's not going to be linear. And if you could just continue to put in the work and to show up, be consistent, you will see the results and you'll see that strength and that speed develop.
Yep, that's right.
Awesome. I loved this conversation. Is there anything else that you would add about pace gears and why we need them?
Just don't complain to your coach about the gears you hate the most, because those are the ones you're going to get prescribed the most.
That is true. That is true. You got to keep that stuff close to the vest. Like, don't, because I'm guilty of like saying to Nell, like, what I'm not looking forward to. And it's like, oh, then it's on my training plan the next week. It's like mile repeats, not my favorite. Ks, Not my favorite. It's like the only workouts I've been doing this season, but it does make you a better runner and you can learn to appreciate those workouts too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think wherever though that you're most uncomfortable is where you should put some more time in so you feel more comfortable there. Just like anything else. One thing that I kind of correlate to it too is that all of your gears are super important to have physically and mentally. But also, there's a lot of things that you can do on the mental side of things, like journaling, so that you can remember where you were at and how far you've come, so that you're not just
Yeah.
like making up things in your head of how much you suck. And then also, just practice really helps. So if you're getting race anxiety often and you're not performing as well as you are in practice, then one thing to think about is just racing more. One year I ran races all the time. I don't even know how many. I should look back and see how many, but it was a lot. And that's exactly how I zapped the race anxiety, just by racing more. So it's the same thing with if you have any gears that you're really uncomfortable with, just putting some more time into those gears and they will feel more comfortable and you'll be more confident in those gears.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. Racing is such a it's its own skill set that we all need to develop and conquer, especially if there is anxiety around racing and how to overcome that because if you don't practice it, it's nothing will change. It's just always going to be there and it might even get worse throughout your years as a runner racing. And that's really scary to think about because it can be something that you can combat and get over and really feel empowered about rather than it like crippling you at the start line. Yeah. Well, great. Well, thanks for this conversation today. It was great to chat with you. And Coach Amber and I definitely have some one on one spots that are still open for the spring season. So we're excited about that. Maybe you're looking to race, maybe you're looking to develop your pace gears and to run strong and happy and healthy this year. So we have a few spots open there. And then, of course, our group training in Denver started a few weeks ago. And we're meeting on Wednesday nights at basically 6 o'clock to work on all these gears to run a strong spring race. And then, Amber, your group starting in Boulder next Wednesday, which is exciting. And you'll be doing a 16-week program all designed around training for the Boulder 10K, which is not an easy 10K, but it is a really fun one to run. And it's also a really fun race to train for because you have a lot of different varieties in the training.
Yeah, let us know if you're interested in one-on-one coaching or group training. We want to see you. We want to hear
Yeah.
from you. We want to help you.
That's right. We want to see you. We want to help you and make 2025 your strongest and best year of running yet. So you can reach out to Sara at elevateyourrunning.com for more information on that. And Amber, I hope you have a great rest of the week. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Sarah. Take care. Have a good week.
Bye.